Thank you, Connor. Good morning. This is a convening of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. It's meeting number 566. Today is Tuesday, September 30th, 2025. It's approximately 10:09 a.m. We are hosting this meeting virtually, so we will do a roll call. Good morning, Commissioner O'Brien.
Good morning, I am here.
Good morning, Commissioner Hill.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Skinner.
Good morning.
And good morning, Commissioner Broder.
Good morning.
All right, with that call to order, I want to go ahead and just set the stage for a moment quickly before we move forward. I want to thank the operators for working with the commission as we looked into patron limits. I also want to thank Chief Teresi and the Sports Wagering Division for their efforts. And as always, the Research and Responsible Gaming team. I also want to thank Commissioner Skinner and the patrons who wrote into the MGC for raising this issue for further research in the first place. I believe you're going to find that we have learned a few key facts. Sports wagering operators need to manage risk, and patrons who take advantage of the legal market are often limited for justifiable reasons. That being said, anecdotal reports that a small number of patrons find themselves facing restrictive limits with little to no justification or notification appears to be true. It also appears to be true that operators are correct that only a small number of patrons are limited. A key component to legalizing sports wagering was to stamp out the gray and illegal markets. To do that, the Commonwealth must ensure that patrons who are not taking advantage of books are allowed to wager in the regulated market. The briefings lead me to believe that algorithms are to blame and human components could be helpful. Although my fellow commissioners and I have been well briefed on the findings, this is our first opportunity to meet together, question the experts together, and to discuss what we have found and how we as a body want to move forward. The market is as competitive as ever, and I remain convinced that the best place to wager is with the legal operators licensed by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. With that, commissioners, I'm going to call Chief Teresi for item number 2. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to this discussion today around player limitations. I'll just set the stage a bit. There are a few components to the presentation. So first, we'll give an overview of the results of the data analysis that we conducted. This portion is appropriate for a public session. We'll do this in public, given that it is generalized information among all operators. Our analyst, Chris Davis, is here should you have any questions for him. There is an executive session listed on the agenda. So if you'd like to discuss anything that is specific to any of the individual operators, we would ask that you do that in executive session for that first portion of the meeting. After that, our consultant, Dustin Gauper from Closing Line Consulting will provide you with some additional background information related to player limiting in public session, and then information specifically related to our operators in executive session. And then finally, we'll discuss some possible next steps. So first, with respect to the data analysis, just to refresh your memory here, in December of 2024, the Sports Wagering Division sent a data request to Massachusetts operators seeking data related to the stake factor and closing line value of players on each operator's platform. A reminder about what those two terms mean. So stake factor is essentially a number that is assigned by an operator to a player that determines the amount that the player can wager above or below a default wager limit. So the operators do use different metrics, but for example, if the default metric used is 100, a player might have a stake factor that would be above or below that 100, which would indicate that the limit had been raised or decreased. Closing line value, or CLV, is a measure of essentially how good or sharp a player is based on whether they place their wager at better odds than the odds at which the wager closes. So those were the two data points we had asked for. The goal of that request was to see if the data supported a conclusion that a correlation exists between a player's stake factor and CLV. What we've been hearing from members of the public was that if you show a tendency to win you will be limited. And if you show a tendency to lose, you will have your limit raised. So we sought to determine whether the data supported what we were hearing anecdotally. In June, we sent a second data request to operators seeking updated data for those same player accounts identified in response to the December request. The goal of this request was to determine if changes in CLV over time resulted in changes to stake factor. So, for example, if a player had been limited in December because they were showing a tendency to win, did their limit change in June if that tendency to win had decreased or they were now showing a tendency to lose? So reviewing the data across all operators, the analysis confirmed a correlation between stake factor and CLV. Specifically, the analysis confirmed that players who consistently beat the closing line are likely to have a lower stake factor, meaning have their limit lowered. And players who do not consistently beat the closing line are more likely to have a higher stake factor, meaning have their limit raised. The data did also show that players whose limits have been raised are far more likely to be classified as VIPs, while very few limited players had VIP status. I'll just note here that we will be bringing a more detailed presentation about VIP programs at a future meeting, but did just want to include that point here. So while percentages vary across operators, on average, the percentage of Massachusetts player accounts that were limited as of December 10th, 2024 was 0.64%. This percentage represents player accounts and not necessarily individual players, as it likely includes people who hold accounts at multiple operators, but we can't confirm that with the data that we have right now. In the memo in your packet, you'll also see that we provided a more detailed breakdown of that 0.64% in terms of the extent to which those players are limited. So we sort of broke it into percentiles, players who are limited to 75 to 99% of the default, so on and so forth, down to less than 1% of the default. And so I'll just note here that 12.7% of the 0.64% fell into that category of being limited to less than 1% of the default limit. With respect to the second data request, the one that we sent in June, the analysis did show that most players had no change in their stake factor over the 6-month period, even if their CLV had changed substantially. So to summarize, we sought to answer the question of whether data from Massachusetts operators showed that players who demonstrate a tendency to win have their limit decreased, and players who demonstrate a tendency to lose have their limit increased. And the answer to that question is yes. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on this portion. Again, as I noted, Chris Davis is here who performed the analysis for us, if you have any questions with respect to the analysis itself.
Thank you, Carrie. Commissioners, questions for Carrie in this session? All right, Carrie.
All right. And no questions, no need for the executive session for this portion at this time. No questions specific to operators here on the data analysis specifically.
Commissioners, do we have questions specific to any operators that we would need to enter into executive session for?
All right.
All right.
Oh, sorry. All right, so we will move on then to the second portion of the presentation. That is our consultant, Dustin Gauker from Closing Line Consulting. As I mentioned, Dustin is going to walk us through some information related to player limiting generally. So we'll go through that portion first, and then we'll move into executive session to discuss more specifics related to information from our operators.
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, Dustin.
Hi, Commissioner Maynard. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie, you have the slides. Somebody's going to be presenting the slides for me.
Oh, 1 second. Yeah.
I'll stall while we're doing that. It's an honor to be here. I've spoken before the commission before, but about 10 years ago, I was just covering the industry of daily fantasy sports and eventually sports betting. I was actually working, the MGC was a source of mine. I was watching these meetings all the time, and it's a great honor to be here in front of you and speaking about all these issues and player limiting here today. Even though my consultancy is called Closing Line Consulting, I am not beating closing line value. I am not a sharp bettor. I obviously know a lot of folks in the industry who are, but I just thought it was a catchy name. So I am, to be clear, I am not a sharp bettor. I am here because I've been in the industry for a decade, covering and analyzing it, and I've been on the affiliate side of things as well. At my last stop, and for the last 3 years, I've been running newsletters about gambling, the gambling industry, and consulting in the industry. So I think
All right.
I've vamped as long as I can.
Yes, I've got it here.
We had the problem where I can't do it myself with my thing. All right, here we go. Limiting sports books. So I've broken this down into a public and a private, an executive session version. If we want to get into more specifics about the operators, I have a separate deck around that. But for now, we'll move on. I've spent time since I've been with the MGC, talking to people, talking to sports books, talking to people in industry, coalescing research around this, and I've tried to come what I think is hopefully some middle ground between the sports books and the players, which is obviously a source of friction in Massachusetts and anywhere that there's legal sports betting. So we can go to the next slide, Carrie. An overview of limiting. Again, hopefully some of this is a little bit redundant for you, and I'll move along. I'll also say if you want to ask questions and stop me at any point, all good. I'm happy to take questions at any point. You're not gonna bother me by doing that. As Commissioner Maynard, I think, said in the opening, sportsbooks appear to limit very little. There's a small cohort of people who wager and are limited. That number is believed to be far less than 1%. Again, the data that Chief Teresi said is definitely bears that out. Sportsbooks do limit people. This is not a secret. They openly admit the practice, and within that group, there are lots of subsets of who is limited and how they're limited. There are definitely people who are just winning bettors, who are beating closing line value and are able to beat the sports book. Some of those people are limited to varying extents. There's also these other cohorts of people who are being limited for a lot of other reasons. I've said a few of these here on the slide, but arbitrage, taking it from beating lines on different books, where you can guarantee a profit, court siding, where you are actually at an event and able to beat the speed of what's going on at the sports book. Obviously, the data feeds at sports books are very fast, but if you're at a live event, this is something that you can take advantage of and beat the sports book by the fact that you have data perhaps even faster than they do. Automation and syndicate play, like betting with scripts and bots that are faster than a human, that a human could not replicate, or an advanced model being able to bet into mispriced lines. These are the top level. There are actually, if we get an executive session, I'm happy to talk more about some of what the operators actually said. But those are the top level reasons. Now, again, I'd say, look, from my conversations, I'd say, that entire group is not people who just beat closing line value because they're very good at sports betting. It's some percentage of all of these things. All right, Carrie, if we can move on to the next one. The bettor side. Bettors, especially sharp ones, would like much higher limits and more transparencies. Here's what I believe bettors want, and I'm happy to have this discussion with anybody else who wants to have it. But I think number one is transparency. Some bettors just want to know more about why their account is being limited. While some may know their behavior is what's causing the limiting, that may not always be the case. And I think by and large, it's not very transparent to a user when they are being limited what is happening. Usually they get a window saying, here's how much you can bet, and that's it. They don't get any kind of correspondence. They're not getting told by the sports book exactly why. Again, they may know why they are being limited, but that's not clear. And from a customer perspective and from a consumer advocacy perspective, I think that's not great. And I think I would agree with some of the commissioners here that there could be more done here that has a human touch, that is not necessarily just an automated bet slip says this is all you can bet and we call it a day. Certainly bettors would like higher limits. There are, again, people who would like to bet more that can't. I don't think there's a whole lot of people who are, and again, I think the data bears this out, there's not a whole lot of people being limited to zero. Some people are being limited to de minimis amounts that are not very, very high and are, don't really make it appealing to bet at the sports book that is limiting them. But at the same time, there's definitely there's some room in there for, we have no limits at all, or we have limits, right? There can be something in between. Is that necessarily the best course of action? We'll get into that. I think people want more choice. Sharp activity still finds a place in the black and gray markets, and even now the white markets. I think more choice in state regulated markets would be ideal for all parties. I know that's outside of the remit of the MGC, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about is policy making decisions that I think, at least the audience here will appreciate. That I think there's this moment in time where we can't, I reject that policy should just be what we've always had. In the background of all of this, of course, is prediction markets that are legal in 50 states as we sit here today. I'm aware of the Massachusetts AG's lawsuit against prediction markets that are regulated at the federal level. But that is one place where people are able to bet and are not going to be limited. This is a betting exchange. And again, I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but that is, if you want to have people being able to bet whatever they want, this is the model you want to have. You have right now a recreational model that makes it hard for anybody who is not one of the operators who operates in Massachusetts to do that. So, but I'll digress and we'll go into the next slide. Who takes sharp action? Again, I alluded to some of this. Proponents of sportsbooks limiting customers in the state regulated markets usually point to 3 examples where limiting is less severe than a majority of sportsbooks. Obviously, number one, this has been around before Massachusetts had sports betting, is offshore sportsbooks. They are often willing to take a sharp action. I will say they do limit too, but maybe not perhaps as severely as the state regulated sportsbooks in Massachusetts and beyond. However, offshore sportsbooks exist in a different ecosystem, one with minimal regulatory, licensing, and taxation burdens. Sans these burdens, it's more attractive to take sharp action and do less limiting. And also, again, this is getting limited in some ways. Not everyone, but there is still limiting that goes on offshore. This is not an all-comers market as well. Sports betting exchanges. The best example of this in the state regulated market, not in Massachusetts, is Sport Trade, which serves a handful of states as we sit here. For what it's worth, again, I alluded to this earlier, prediction markets, Kalshi, crypto.com, also has a deal with Underdog Fantasy, which is an operator around the country. They are also taking that. Polymarket is another prediction market that is going to open perhaps within days. These are all in essence sports betting exchanges that operate either under a state regulated model or under a model regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The exchange model is fundamentally different from traditional sports books. It does not function as the house technically. Exchanges offer peer-to-peer, sometimes against users, sometimes against entities set up as market makers. The model in the US proves difficult to make money as a state regulated business without much scale. Sport Trade takes a commission on winning bets. As a result, handle to revenue ratio is relatively low. At Sport Trade, revenue is something like 1% to 2% of all handle, and I'm sure you're aware that that hold in the United States, that in the state regulated model is anywhere from 8 to 12 and even higher, sometimes higher depending on the month and time frame. It's worth noting that this model can definitely work with lower barriers to entry at scale, like we're seeing at Kalshi, and federally regulated prediction markets. And last category is Las Vegas and sharp books. Las Vegas sportsbooks have existed for decades. And again, some limiting does go on, albeit in a less severe manner than what goes on outside of Nevada. But it should be noted that the Nevada sports betting model is fairly unique and different from other states. The industry grew up entirely as a retail operation. And even today, a quarter of all action still comes in a retail setting. And while adoption of online betting continues, it lags much of the rest of the country. Hold in Las Vegas is usually around 6 to 7%, much lower than the 9 to 10 and even higher we see nationally across regulated online sportsbooks. Some of this is because of the way the market's set up, where more straight bets and fewer parlays are placed, but some of this is likely because Las Vegas has been willing to take sharp action at a higher clip than its counterparts in the rest of the country. The best examples of this, and again, these exist also outside of Las Vegas, are Circa and Prime Sports. These are sports books where limiting doesn't really take place in a meaningful way. There are pretty much anyone can get a large amount down if they want to. They will take that action. It's worth noting these sports books are much smaller than the market leaders. Circa has less than 0.5% of the market nationwide, and Prime is de minimis, although they just launched in another state in Kentucky as well. They serve a smaller group of states and also hold at a much lower rate than national sports books. Circa, for instance, holds about 5% of bets and arguably doesn't generate meaningful revenue from sports betting vis-a-vis the cost to operate it in the states it serves. Prime actually lost money by gross gaming revenue metrics in fiscal year 2024, from what I can see, and is holding only about 1.5% of bets so far in 2025 by the tracking that I do. So again, that last one, I think is a good example of, if you want to have this model, it's hard to force that on sports that are in Massachusetts today. I think it would be a good thing if Massachusetts were to allow a model where these sports books could come into the Massachusetts and feel like they could do business here. Right now, I think they think the regulatory, taxation, and licensing burdens are too high, that they wouldn't do that. They are entering new states all the time, and that goes for Sport Trade as a sports betting exchange as well. But that is the blocker that is stopping, again, the two options that we do have in state regulated markets: the sports betting exchange, basically Sport Trade, and the sharp books, Prime, represented by Prime and Circa. And so that's where it comes down on that. We'll go on to the next slide about how sports books will react to mandatory higher limits. I'm just here to tell you reality. You can make of this what you want, what you will, but it's clear sports books would do something if confronted with a state mandating higher limits for users. How each book might react is unknown and would likely vary, but there's a sampling of how sports books would act to mitigate the impact of such a change from publicly available statements and my understanding of how the industry would work. First off, incentivization to users in the forms of bonuses, odds boosts, et cetera, maybe do get downgraded in Massachusetts or any place that would consider moving up limits. This, of course, would be antithetical to creating a robust ecosystem that continues to channelize action from the black market to regulated. I think sports books would adjust their lines to try to compensate for taking more action. This would have two knock-on effects, likely limiting desire of sharp action to bet into the market because the lines are worse, and two, making the product worse for in-state bettors while increasing the revenue or increasing losses of regular non-sharp users. It's clear they would do something. And again, data from Illinois, this is not an exact comp, but we already have Illinois as an example of not exact comp to what we're doing here, but Illinois has introduced a per wager fee, and sportsbooks have shown they are willing to confront the reality of what's going on in front of them by changing what they're doing in that state. Sportsbooks are making geofence changes to make sure their business remains profitable at the same rate it was before. They are either creating, again, higher limits, which is ironic, I know, but they're creating higher limits so that people have to bet X amount in order to be able to place a bet, because they're now paying 25 or 50 cents to Illinois in the form of a per wager fee or tax. They are also, so they're doing something. Again, this is what would happen, again, with the understanding it's not exact. It's just an example of how they would react if confronted with something in Massachusetts. I don't think anything would be different. They would make some amount of changes, and you can not like those changes, but I don't think you can just mandate we're going to have higher limits and then not expect anything to happen on the sportsbook side, on the operator side. There is going to be some sort of change if you do that. All right, and the next slide. So whether you asked for it or not, I'm going to give you what you could do. And some of this will dovetail with what I think some commissioners are looking to do and what Chief Teresi would advocate for. But if we eliminate the idea that there should be no limit at all, I think that's obviously out the window. What we should do, we should advocate for transparency. Sportsbooks admit they are generally not transparent about the reasons for limiting sports individual bettors. Again, the promise of state-regulated sports betting was supposed to be, in some ways, consumer protection, right? And I heard that in the comments from Commissioner Maynard at the beginning, that we want, while we want to support regulated sports betting and the operators, and we're here to support them, at the same time, we're here to provide consumer protection. And if consumers and bettors are not getting the transparency they want, there's arguably something that can and should be done about this in the regulated market. What does that look like? I'm going to leave that to you to decide, but I do reject the idea that everyone just gets a bet slip that says, here's what you can bet on every market without any understanding of what that limit looks like, why they're being limited. I think that's not. Now, how would that go? How would you go about doing that? Obviously, you'd have to work with operators on how to do it. Is the MGC prepared or willing to take on more of a consumer advocacy role in terms of, if a consumer is confronted with a limit, how far are you willing to go to research that and to determine whether they're being limited? You almost need a whole, I'd argue, a customer service side of, being able to advocate for the user. Again, I think this would be borne out in any kind of rulemaking or further discussions, but this is where I'd say if you're going to do something, this is where you can do it. Advocate for transparency for the end user. You could obviously increase standard minimum bets. So setting a relatively low number that every sportsbook would have to take is feasible, but would still invite some of the knock-on effects I added earlier. Again, you're moving one piece, and a bunch of other pieces are going to move as a result. I'm not saying this is the best course of action, but it is one that you can. Sportsbooks would obviously hate that, and I'm not sure it would really make bettors that happy either if you did. But again, if you're trying to create incremental steps toward a more fair marketplace, it's something that you could do. Thirdly, changes in advertising. I think sports books in the Massachusetts and across the country have, at least in the past, advertised themselves as places where anyone can win money no matter who you are. And that's, of course, not true because of limited bettors. I think that advertising has largely gone away from a self-regulatory standpoint, that they have reined in advertising, promising that you can win, thousands or millions of dollars because of this dynamic, because they don't want to answer these questions out in public. So again, you could advocate for a rulemaking around here. I'm not sure it's necessary right now, but in the past, this has been one of my biggest problems with regulated sports books, is that they would there's this promise of anybody can come, anybody can win, and that certainly wasn't true. Excuse me. And again, the last thing I'm going to advocate for is, again, far outside the MGC's remit, but a change in regulatory regime. Creating a statutory scheme that would allow exchange models to operate legally in the state, as well as books that want to take sharp action and take all action. This is the best solution to the issue of limiting. There's nothing, if you are going to do this, again, it takes obviously the legislature to get involved in this. I know the MGC can't unilaterally start doing this, but this is how you solve the problem. We are seeing the problem solved for you by nationally regulated prediction markets. This problem, it may go away by way of the courts. I know some of you are familiar with everything that's going on there. But at the end of the day, in 1 to 2 to 3 years, this may be the way the world is, that we have federally regulated prediction markets. And if you're going to sit here and say, we're going to have state regulated markets competing with this, then you need to change the regulatory regime. You need to allow exchanges. You need to allow sports books to take sharp action, because this is the way forward. The way forward is not going to be forcing your existing licensees to say, you have to take all bets. You have to take more bets. They are going to react. You may not like it, and maybe you can make rules around that, but I don't think that's the best way forward, is to say, you have to take bets the way we want you to take them. They're just going to change how they do business, and you're not going to like how they change their business in response. So the biggest thing I'm telling Massachusetts is I tell anybody who asks me around this, whether I'm consulting with them or not, is that state regulatory regimes should change. I think the world we live in today makes that very clear, that we need change. When Massachusetts and other states launched sports betting, the only real threat, and if you want to call it a threat, the only real competition was offshore sports betting. That is far different today. And not only do we have prediction markets, but we have sweepstakes sports books that are offering acting as sports betting exchanges as well. You can, again, there are so many ways to get down lots of money now that are outside of the state regulated sports betting market in Massachusetts and lots of other places. So, I challenge people to look at what's going on in the world today around prediction markets, around exchanges, around limiting, and to change how they do business and allow other types of sports books to get into the market. And that concludes my public-facing comments and slides. And again, happy to take questions in the public setting. And I do have the executive session slides if we want to talk more about what operators told the MGC.
Thank you, Dustin. I see Commissioner Broder's mute is off. I will say, I, for one, am going to be extremely cautious talking about prediction markets, given that we are in active litigation. Commissioner Broder.
Question and a comment. Question is, do you know if anyone, particularly in the Commonwealth, given our consumer protection laws, in particular Chapter 93A, has any limited bettor or interested party ever tried to litigate here in Massachusetts on a consumer protection theory? Or deceptive advertising theory, I should say.
I do not know the answer to that. I would probably be more for legal counsel here. I know there have been class actions around the country. Actually, more going back to DFS back in the day about fairness and all of that. I can't say that I know for a fact whether I don't believe so in Massachusetts, but I could be wrong. I won't swear on a stack of Bibles that they haven't.
It occurs to me as I say that one of the problems with a private actor doing it is, how would you articulate the harm? What is the damage if you have to quantify it, if you have to turn it into dollars as opposed to injunctive relief? You gotta make some kind of theory. Oh, I would have won X, or what is the quantifiable harm might be a little bit tricky. So
saying like I could have won because I could bet more.
First.
Exactly.
But it's again, I'd advocate for more on the consumer protection side, like less being litigious and more being like proactive, right? How can we help consumers who are facing this? That would be my answer to all of this, is how can we, this consumer is faced with limits, may not be sure why they're limited, just wants an answer. Again, they can go to customer support, maybe they get that answer, maybe not. And again, that would be the next step of like making sure that I think this is the bare minimum that the MGC and sportsbook operators can do, is say, if somebody's limited, we're gonna do something more than just give them here's your max wager and a bet slip. That seems to me to not be the greatest thing in the world. I think there is room for something more there. Again, there's a wide range of outcomes in that to, an automated pop-up saying you're limited, blah, 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 because of Y, because of X, Y, Z, or again, creating a process where somebody who is limited can do something, can get a reason for a why. And again, I think we didn't touch on this in the slides, but like operators, a user can go to an operator and ask for their stake factor to be increased, right? As Carrie went over, but that process isn't clear. And would the sportsbook even would even do that? Probably not in a lot of cases, as the data bears out. But again, like I feel like there's a process here that's missing that, and again, this is a larger problem, I think, in state regulated sports betting. It was the legalization of sports betting was pitched as consumer protection. I often see that not happening in a material way, despite, yes, you can go to a regulator if something comes up, you lost money, whatever. Yes, that's good, that can happen. But there's not really a whole lot of processes always for a consumer to say, I don't understand what's happening, I'm being wronged, I think, and then what do I do about it? That's not always clear in a state regulated model to me.
I 100% agree with that the idea of increasing transparency and being responsive to that consumer confusion or that desire for more information is a no-brainer. I'm not exactly sure what form that should take, but perhaps that is something we will be talking about later on in the meeting, is what kind of things can we do. So my comment, though, I will try to, in recognition that there is ongoing litigation, is I do want to parse your comment a little bit about prediction markets, on a federally regulated model versus the state-by-state model that goes on in what I'll call traditional sports betting, if that makes sense, is that there is federal jurisdiction over that marketplace, but to the extent that that they act on that, I would just suggest it is not nearly as robust, if it exists at all, in the federal marketplace. And we all recall that comment from the attorney for one of the operators talking about how, well, if they lose their shirt, it's on them. And it would be terrific if we could, moving forward with that marketplace, with the prediction marketplace, be able to operate with some level of impact or jurisdiction. It appears that they are resisting that model right now, but that it does deserve some level of consumer protection. If we can figure that out,
I mean, yeah,
that would help everyone.
Yeah, no, I mean, no argument for me on the level of regulation from a gambling standpoint from federally regulated prediction markets is not as robust as what happens in the state. I don't think anybody would argue that. Maybe the operators themselves would argue that. But again, we're here. I'm just trying to prepare you for the world to come. And this is a lot of what I do in my job. Yes, Massachusetts AG is suing operators. They may not win. They may win, they may not. But I think the lesson again is that this is something that sports betting laws, including Massachusetts, didn't really contemplate how to do this. And again, a sports betting exchange is not going to waltz into Massachusetts tomorrow under the current licensing, taxation, and regulatory regime and open up for business. That's clear. We've obviously seen a contraction in the number of operators. Finding a way to allow this class of business to operate in Massachusetts. Again, I feel a little dumb preaching to you guys because this is not your remit, but there's people who are listening to this, I'm sure, who can manifest this change. But this is, if you want to solve the problem of limiting, this is how you do it. You allow for exchanges. You allow for a different model that doesn't work on the same recreational model that DraftKings and FanDuel and the rest of the operators operate on. You need to create a lower barrier to entry. So if this is what you want, that is the easiest and cleanest way to solve it. I say the easiest and cleanest because it takes a new law almost certainly. Yep. That is what we need to contemplate. And again, you may be competing with federally regulated exchanges 3 to 5 years down the road if they win the court. You're competing with them now, to be fair, but that may be the end state as well. So I reject that. We should just say, you know what, prediction markets will be gone because they'll lose in the courts eventually. Who knows if that happens? Right. Who knows? Who knows? That is, need a prediction market on that, right?
There probably is one. Yeah. I appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Cheers.
Commissioner O'Brien. Thank you, Commissioner Broder.
So just somewhat answering Commissioner Broder's question, but also, Dustin, for your benefit, is we were very deliberate and careful in our regulations to ensure that it was clear that any consumer remedy that existed for consumer protections prior to the implementation of the Gaming Act still existed to consumers. And so, as you pointed out, we have a role. AG's office has a role in connection with 93 that we do not. Any other litigations that don't involve us in a sense that are out there, those are still, I don't know of anyone off the top of my head. I know legal can probably confirm this or not in terms of an individual trying to make the deceptive advertising argument. We have also tried to be aggressive in terms of our advertising regulations. This conversation, certainly as one commissioner, would make me want to revisit where that is and is there anything else that we can do in that regard, not only for the youth protections we have in there, but in general in terms of deceptive practices. A query that I do have for you, and maybe some of it will be answered when we go into executive session in terms of the individual responses of the operators, is aside from what you're talking about, sort of the easiest, maybe not the easiest, but the most straightforward, assuming legislation would pass in terms of legalizing the prediction markets. If we deal with what we have on the ground right now and what we have the ability to regulate, what is the solution? Because that, from an academic perspective, might be the most straightforward solution, but that's outside our control. And so, curious as to some of the things you've talked about, minimum wagers, that sort of thing. One of the things that came up in one of our earlier roundtables was what Australia did in racing, where they said the minimum and the maximum could only have a certain ratio, right? So you're going to limit people, that's fine, but that's going to hit your upper end too, so that we're all going to keep it somewhat proportional, right? So you're going to have to sort of keep that minimum at a certain level if you're going to want to allow people to have the bigger bets. Was that something that you looked at or have a comment on?
Yeah, I'll go back first and say, if I made it sound like I think Massachusetts is not good on consumer protection, you are far and away one of the best states in terms of that, right? That is not the case. You have been looking at advertising. You've been looking at these issues for years. I know that. I think mine was more on this specific topic, right? That what you could do about limiting it.
Understood.
And again, yes, the minimum maximum ratio. Again, you could do that. I don't think it changes the dynamic that I talked about, though, in terms of how sportsbooks would react, right? If you are limiting their top end action, and creating if you're creating a ceiling and floor, they are still going to do some of those knock-on effects, because again, they want the business. They're not going to just start again, Illinois, I think, is indicative of this, right? They are not just going to eat a new tax or eat a new policy and say, well, we're going to lose more money because of this policy in Massachusetts. They are going to take steps to make sure that their revenue stays the same. These are publicly traded companies that need to grow. So they are not going to just say, well, there's going to be knock-on effects, right? You can say, again, that I don't think it's much different than what I talked about in terms of how an operator would react to it, because again, on the top, if you stay on the top end, then they're again losing revenue because they're not going to get that revenue from a whale or something like that, in terms of they're going to lose revenue from that, in addition to losing revenue from having the higher minimum. So it's going to create these same knock-on effects. If the delta is very high, like the minimum is very low, the maximum is very high, maybe that would be the way to go. If you're going to if you're dead set on doing that, that would be the way to go. Is like very low minimum, very high maximum, with a large ratio between the two things. But it's not going to solve the problem of the operators are going to react in kind and probably make the product worse, make the lines worse, make it worse for recreational sports bettors, who are 99% of the people who are using the state regulated sports books in Massachusetts.
Right. And I guess a component that is in all of this is the interplay between this and the VIP programs, and then consumer protection in terms of sort of our responsible gaming group, right? Which is, there may be no perfect solution, but is there one that also maximizes consumer protections and minimizes sort of the risk of falling into that high risk betting category?
Yeah, I mean,
and that's obviously not a question for you in this forum, just something that I do think has to overlay this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I know you guys have been talking about this for a long time. I applaud you even talking about it, because it's not something that, like, you guys go into issues that no other state does. Honestly, I follow what every state has done. I watch some of the, I follow what the commissioners and the regulators do. You guys talk about the issue. Do you have to do something? Arguably not, but arguably something should be done. And I think, unfortunately, it feels like a cop out, but there's no easy solution to to this end. Like, everybody, and at the end of the day, everybody would like everybody to be able to bet whatever they want, and again, you guys, you may disagree with this argument, but you guys limit, right, in casinos, like physical casinos. Is that different because it's a physical place rather than an online sports books? That's in the eye of the beholder. But the same dynamic happens to some extent when people are counting cards or advantage play at casinos. I think, again, the difference though is that a person would probably know exactly, right, when they are told to, like, we don't want your action anymore. They are told that, right? They are told, we don't want your action, and that person probably knows. Again, a lot of the sports bettors probably know why they're being limited, but that is not a unit that, like, because it's online and because there's more of them, that's not always the case. So I think, again, it would be nice for me to say, you do this solves the problem. It doesn't. A new law solves the problem. Again, but it doesn't do anything that you guys can change it with right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions for Dustin?
Mr. Chairman, all I would say, excellent work. This has not been an easy subject for any of us, and certainly not for the consumers. But the information that you were able to gather over the last few months and get to us for this discussion today has been phenomenal and appreciated. So I just wanted to put out there, Mr. Chairman, great job by Dustin and team on getting the information, because I think something is going to come out of this discussion. I don't want to preview what we'll talk about later in the meeting, but excellent job, Dustin, and thank you.
Cheers.
So I think Dustin has prepared a deck for executive session. Carrie?
That's right, Chair. We have a second portion that Dustin can present to us if you'd all like to move into executive session.
Do we want to hear it? All right, let me read in some language quickly. The Commission anticipates that it will meet in executive session in accordance with General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, General Law, Chapter 4, Section 726G, and General Law, Chapter 23N, Section 6I, to discuss trade secrets or commercial information related to player limitations voluntarily provided to the Commission by operators for use in developing governmental policy, and upon a promise of confidentiality, and further, which would be detrimental to the operators if disclosed. Should we enter into executive session for that reason?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien.
Aye.
Commissioner Hill,
Aye.
Commissioner Skinner,
Aye.
and Commissioner Broder.
Yes.
All right, and we will return to the public portion after this. All right. I think we can take that down. Screensaver. Do people still call them screensavers? Notification, whatever we want to call it. All right. So we just finished a conversation that allowed us to dive a little deeper into Dustin's public comments. Again, understanding to the public that we've all been well briefed on this before even entering into today. And so that leads us to sub-item C, which is discussion regarding possible next steps related to player limitations. And again, if anybody has any further questions for Dustin, I'm sure he will be happy to answer. Commissioners, what are we thinking?
And Chair, I'll just note that there are a number of possibilities laid out for you in your packet, pages 5 and 6 of the memo, ranging from regulations to continued data analysis to items where we want some further review and research. Of course, it's not all inclusive, and we're happy to take any next steps that you'd like.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Carrie. Commissioner Hill.
I'll start the conversation by saying what I would like to see, and I think we all think the same, is at the very least, I would like to see the staff maybe come back with some language on a regulation that players be notified that they've been limited. I think at the very least, if you've been limited, you should be told you've been limited. I'd like to see language that says why you've been limited, but we can have a conversation about that. But at the very least, they should be notified that they have been limited. So I would start the conversation with that suggestion and proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill. Commissioner O'Brien.
I would agree with that. I would also like us to take this opportunity to go back and look at advertising regs. I think it's good to look at them anyway. It's been a couple of years, and I would like to circle in specifically on what representations are made that, entertainment versus a way to make money. And that's been something that I have been looking at in my mind for a while. And I think this kind of hones in on it, that if you're going to try to convince people that they can do this as a means of getting rich or making a lot of money, but then there's also this risk of getting limited. That's a thing we should look at. I would also like more information about specifically drilling down on the whys, rather than we have some level of information that I will not go into publicly per operator in terms of criterion. I would like a little more information on what does that mean exactly and translate into in terms of putting somebody in the box. And then I do like the idea of trying to figure out when and how people get out of that box, and whether that is some sort of initial report to our gaming group before we decide whether we want a recurring reg, or whether we want to talk about drafting a reg now. I'm open to either. It may be more effective and efficient for us to get a report to gaming first before we decide what we want to do in a reg. But those are the couple of areas. More information on the one, drafting the reg of notification, as Commissioner Hill said, and then possibly getting a more detailed report on review, and then determining whether we want a reg about influencing that.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien. Commissioner Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. So far 3 for 3 on those 3 recommendations from Commissioner Hill and Commissioner O'Brien. In addition to those, I would suggest we give the operators the opportunity to respond to our findings. Not that we need the operators to validate our own research here in this area, but I do think it is important as we continue to have this discussion about how to move forward, based on the information we've uncovered. I would like the operators to weigh in on what it is that we have concluded. I think that's the only way we can get a true reading of the direction that we should take here.
I had to find my mute. Thank you, Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Broder.
Briefly, I agree with everything everyone said. I don't think we are ready for a regulation yet, because I'm not sure if we're we're at a point where we know exactly what we want to drill down on in terms of some kind of regulatory change, if any at all. Given what those of us have said, recognizing you still need a chance to speak, Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if Chief Teresi can comment on whether or not we've given her so far something that is actionable, if she needs something more specific in order to move forward.
No, absolutely. I think we can certainly move forward with the things I've heard so far, working on sort of an initial draft. This would be the very beginning stages of what notifications would look like for you all to discuss what you're looking for there, getting more information about how the decisions are made, and then hearing from our operators their responses on our findings.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'd like to weigh in too. I learned yesterday, I met my counterpart from a different jurisdiction, and he said he always speaks first and not last. I may start doing that. I think I agree with all four of my fellow commissioners actually on every piece. I think the operators, to Commissioner Skinner's piece, have to be part of the solution. We've identified the problem that we've had, and we've talked about it now for over a year, which is, if I'm going to throw a number out, 0.5% of bettors are being limited without justification. I want the algorithms to be retooled. I want people to be held accountable at the operators to making sure that those folks can get back into the regulated market. I also want to know, when we do get contacted, because we do, by patrons, why that person was limited. A way that we can get ahead of that is if they're notified about their limitation. So with all that said, I think the Massachusetts Gaming Commission tries to be the most fair regulator, period. And so this is really about fairness and making sure that when players aren't taking advantage of the books, but yet they're limited, that they're able to get out of that box, as Commissioner O'Brien artfully put it, and back into the market. So with that said, Chief Teresi, sounds like you've got your marching orders.
Yes, got it. Thank you very much.
Anything else, commissioners? All right. Any other business that we didn't anticipate? Would we like to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner O'Brien,
Aye.
Commissioner Hill,
Aye.
Commissioner Skinner,
Aye.
Commissioner Broder,
Yes.
and I vote yes, 5-0. Thank you, Carrie and team. Thank you to Dustin for your insights. And we look forward to seeing what comes out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day.